Appreciate you coming today on such short notice. What we are here today to talk about is obviously the officer-involved shooting with Officer Dylan Williams with the Knoxville Police Department and Shannara Tom Philly Feep back on August the 26th of 2019. Typically, we do not have a press conference in cases like this. I want to talk about typically what we do when we review an officer-involved shooting. What the typical procedure is that when we do a case, at the end of the case, when we make a determination to either charge or not charge, what happens is we send a letter, a declination letter if we're not charging, to the heads of both agencies, both the investigative agency and to the head of the agency that employed the officer who was involved in the shooting. That letter typically goes out to those chiefs and sheriffs. Sometimes we attach a memo, an internal memo that we do in these cases to that letter. Sometimes we do not. But typically that's what happens, and then you guys become aware because the letter has gone out doing the declination of prosecution. In this case, we felt that it was just a little different, that this was a case that we needed to treat differently, and really for three reasons. Really because of the amount of community attention that this case has garnered, for one. Secondly, really because of the misinformation that's out there, the inaccurate information that has circulated around our community involving the shooting. And thirdly, I wanted to do this to stay consistent with my policy of being as transparent as I can be, as quickly as I can be with the community and explaining my decisions. Another thing you need to know is that we have prepared a packet of information for you. You will each be receiving that packet at the end of this press conference. It contains a couple of things. It contains a copy of the PowerPoint that you are fixing to see. It also contains a copy of the very detailed interoffice memo that we did detailing the facts and the law and its application in this particular case. You will also have attached to that memo an addendum which will include a bullet point synopsis of eyewitness statements in this case. So you should all leave with that completed packet. We have those. And we will hand those out to you so you can take those back with you. This particular case was prepared in our major crimes unit, our homicide unit. We treat all these cases as homicides, and this particular case was done by Sean McDermott. I want to thank him for his tireless dedication in this case, the work that he put in. He did a fantastic job of turning over every rock, as it would be in this case, to make sure that we had every bit of testimony, evidence, everything that we needed in this particular case to make the right determination. So that memo is in great part his work that you'll be receiving later today. I also need you to know that we have spoken to the Feep family. As in these cases, we like to sit down with the family, give them notice before we give you notice as to what is happening. That meeting took place earlier today. We met with, in this particular case, the family is represented by 2 local attorneys. We met with those attorneys and spoke with family members in Rhode Island by phone. And we also spoke with the mother of Mr. Feep's child. She was here in the office when we did the phone call. So we had that meeting earlier today. I wanted you to know that they are aware prior to this press conference taking place. Okay, the role of the district attorney in reviewing one of these cases is simply to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. We determine whether or not this was a homicide. This was clearly a homicide. We determine whether it was a justifiable homicide or not. So that is our role. We, in this community, use an outside law enforcement agency to do investigative shootings. You know that. In this particular case, it was a KPD shooting Officer Dylan Williams was a KPD officer, so therefore the Sheriff's Department, Knox County Sheriff's Department, investigated this case. So what I want to do is go through that case with you and explain to you everything we had to make our determination. This is a list of the evidence that we reviewed in this case. As you can see, it is a long list. We will cover most of this in the presentation today. What we don't cover is all covered in the memo, so I won't take time to go through that list and with you as it's up. I'll just talk about it as we go through the presentation, so I wanted you to be aware of kind of some of the things that we looked at so that you would know that this was an exhaustive search. On 8/26, Mr. Feet was driving a gold sedan. He was on Baxter Avenue. He hit another vehicle on Baxter Avenue at Elm Street. That accident caused a hit and run call to go out because Mr. Feet left the scene. He was driving his gold sedan. He hit a gray Toyota Highlander. He disabled the Highlander. He knocked the front wheel off, and so another civilian witness watched that accident, and he watched Mr. Feet flee the scene. So the civilian witness began to chase Mr. Feet on his own. He called in to 911 and talked to them on the phone as he followed Mr. Feet. He followed him as he was getting back onto the interstate. He headed north. They went up Clinton Highway. He's talking to 911 dispatch while he's following, giving us information. What he did was he gave information to 911 that described the vehicle. He identified the license plate. He gave a description of the driver as Mexican or mixed. He provided that tag number of 9MI or 9M1645. That was not the only 911 call that came in. In the Highlander that was hit, it was a grandmother and granddaughter. The granddaughter also made a call into 911, but she gave the same information. So at this point, what I'd like to do is play the 911 call that we had that came in from the witness.
Call 1 on Monday, August 26, 2019, at 5:16 p.m. with a GMT offset of negative 240 minutes. Agent ID is extension is 210.
Where's your emergency?
Yes, I'm right here. I'm following this guy. He just did a hit and run, and I don't know what to do. I'm using a fire rescue squad. I walk over here and let them know to see if they should chase him, because I really don't want to. He's running right, so I'm following him. I'm getting back up on the interstate.
Was you involved in the wreck?
He's turning left, getting on the interstate. He went down this one road next to Lonsdale. I don't know where I'm at. I'm getting on the interstate now.
Okay. Was you involved in the wreck?
No, I was not, but I am a witness. I watched it happen. He hit the person, and then he took off.
Was it?
No, I want to say he's kind of Mexican or he's mixed. I'm not sure.
Do you know where it happened at?
He's running, and yeah.
Do you know where the wreck happened at?
I'm sorry?
Do you know where the wreck happened? Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you now.
Do you know where the wreck happened at?
I'm sorry?
Do you know where it happened at?
It happened on Baxter Avenue. Right when you get on the interstate, or sorry, get on that Baxter, like I know New Grace is a church right there. It's right there at that intersection right there. But I mean, he's taking off. Like, I mean, he's not speeding. I think he does. I don't think he knows I'm following him. But if I think I will stay on him, but I'm staying a distance away because I'm not going to let him get mad. I don't know.
And it's close to New
What I mean?
Grace Baptist Church? Oh.
Yeah, it's right in front of that. There's an intersection right there. Right now we're headed, I'm passing exit 2 on Central Street, or Central, I think that's what it said. But, he's probably about 2 cars in front of me right now.
Do you happen to get his tag number?
I did not get it. Listen, I was going to
No.
pull in because I saw it happen. I just didn't make sure that I needed a witness. And then he took off. Well, then I didn't talk to the people. They're in a gray, kind of like it's a gray SUV truck. Their wheels bent. Like, he hit them like they slid.
Okay. And what color is the other vehicle?
This other vehicle, it is a goldish color.
That's car, van, truck.
It's a car. It looks like I can't. I'm almost close enough to get the tags on it, but I can't get them just yet. But I'm kind of like nervous because I do not want for them to know I'm following them and then they go from there, you know.
Okay. So which direction are you guys headed?
We are headed towards. We're taking exit 3, going towards Clinton Highway right now. And luckily, this is the direction I'm already going, so it doesn't bother me.
Okay. See. Oh, but this is the other caller right here. Huh? Okay, yeah, it looks like the other person that's involved just called in. We've got help coming out to them, and I've got them updated on where that vehicle has went now. Do you want to leave your name for a
I'm going to
witness?
go call to. What?
Do you want to leave your name for a witness?
That's fine. Is it alright because I don't want y'all to lose, because he's going to start running once he gets on Clinton Highway.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll care to stay
We
on my
don't-
phone if that's what I'm going.
We don't advise you to follow them in case they do cause another wreck, but
I mean, I'll stay a good distance away. I'm not like on him. Like he doesn't know I'm following him. You can tell, because otherwise he'd have took off from me.
okay.
We're right now we're passing Clayton on Clinton Highway.
If you want to leave your name,
His license plate is 9MI6Y5.
you said 9MI695?
6Y5.
6Y5. Okay. Alright, we do have their tag number now, so they can definitely find them.
Okay.
Alright.
Yeah.
And your telephone number?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to put that in the call and let them know their tag number as well.
Alrighty.
Alright, well, we will get them out there in the area also, see if they can find them, okay?
Alright, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Call 1 on Monday, August 26, 2019 at 5:16 p.m. with a GMT offset of negative 240 minutes. Agent ID is extension is 210.
Okay. You heard the 2 beeps on that. Obviously, we were beeping out the witness's name and the witness's phone number as to why those beeps were on there. Okay, that's the information that was called in by the 911 caller. Once that information was received, KPD radio traffic relayed that information out. I'm going to play for you the KPD radio traffic that went out. When that went out, it went out on radio traffic, and we've compressed this. This is a little confusing, but we've compressed this radio traffic. You're going to hear all KPD radio traffic. That's what was starting. As you're going to hear it as it goes out. Then at the end of this, you're going to hear everything that Officer Williams said on this video. At the very end of it, he is already talking to Mr. Feep at the apartment complex, because we've compressed this so you don't have to listen to hours, minutes, and hours of radio traffic. So what you need to know for this is that Officer Williams is 79 Charlie, and that 1053 is a hit and run code. This is what Officer Williams would have heard coming across the radio.
81 Charlie, I'm going to be out with 82 here.
Yeah, Colin.
Hey,
Okay.
Bravo, and did you get a 53 report at
Velvet Baxter.
Pulling it up. Seven Charlie.
27 Charlie.
Okay, Alman Baxter. So the caller's in a gray Highlander was hit by a gold sedan. A witness followed the vehicle and got a tag on it. 9 Mike 1, 6 Yankee 5. For 6 Yankees, no. Start over. 9 Mike Ida, 6 Yankee 5.
55 Charlie Alpha Lima 10-8.
10-4.
74 Charlie, I didn't last 97. 79 Charlie, this. 77 Charlie.
77 Charlie intercom.
I'm not here with your suspect vehicle from the 1053, 1716 Russian.
10-4, we have the individual that was driving.
Negative. I'm not quite now. If you can, when you get with the driver of the other vehicle, give me a description of the possible driver.
Light to medium skin, black male with Hispanic.
Okay. When Officer Williams heard that radio traffic go out, he, in his statement, said that he was on Western Avenue in Mechanicsville. When he heard that radio traffic go out, he, at that time,
81
entered
Charlie, I'm gonna be.
he entered that information into the criminal justice portal. That's what I'm showing you right now. Criminal justice portal is where you can put a license plate and it will give you the information regarding that license plate. If we zoom in on that, you will see that this is plate 9M1 6Y5. At that time, Officer Williams was made aware that the owner of this particular vehicle lived at 1716 Merchants Drive, apartment 1202. Officer Williams knew that this particular address was Tillery Ridge Apartments here in Knoxville. Tillery Ridge Apartments are located to the northwest of where we are. We're in the City County building here. Tillery Ridge is here, just to orient yourselves. Tillery Ridge is, this is a closer view of it. It's off of Merchants Drive. Yet a closer view tells us that it is across from Norwood Elementary School. And lastly, I want to show you this because what I want you to be able to do is see that we are talking about this particular parking lot is where this activity occurred. This map that we're going to be referring to is of this parking lot. That's why I wanted to try to orient you. Officer Williams drives down this road into this parking lot. You're going to see that the suspect vehicle is here. Officer Williams pulls up behind it. You're going to hear and see on the cruiser video that they run up between two buildings. These will be the two buildings that they're running between, and they're fighting their way back down. So this parking lot here is this map. And this is the map that we'll be using from here on to orient you. This building is turned actually the opposite way, which is a little confusing, but Officer Williams will come this way, pull into this parking lot, and park here. This is Mr. Feep's vehicle parked here when you see the video, so you'll know what you're looking at. This is the apartment building. This is an apartment building next to that. Officer Williams walks between the buildings and they fight coming back down that particular way. So you're oriented to the scene. I told you that here was the car that Officer Williams had been notified of. Here is a picture of the car as it sat in the parking lot. These are crime scene photos. You'll notice that the tag is in fact 9M1 6Y5. The car did have front end damage as it sat in the parking lot. This is obviously proof of the front end damage. This is our, once again, our photo that we'll be referring to so you can see what happened. You'll also see where witnesses were located and where forensic proof is located later during the presentation on this. All right, at this point I'm going to play the cruiser video. I want to warn you that there is some graphic, strong language on the cruiser video. The shooting does not occur on video. It does occur on audio though, so you will hear it. So for press purposes, I just want to make you aware of that as we show the video. The video will be shot from this perspective. This is where his car is parked, and you'll be seeing video shooting because Officer Williams had a dash cam in his 2014 Tahoe. He does not turn on the audio portion until he pulls into the parking lot, so.
You know whose car this is out here? Joel, Josh? Third floor.
As Officer Williams goes around the building, he encounters Mr. Feep, and you will hear that encounter.
Hi. Hi, you drive a car down here? I'm out here with your vehicle from 753. You gotta park there. You ready? Negative. I'm like passing now. If you can, when you get with the driver of the other vehicle, you need a description of the possible driver. Where you live up here?
Like the mediums again, blackmail or saying.
Oh, what do you know? You have keys in your pocket? Hey, get your hands out of your pocket. Oh, turn your head out of your pocket. Turn your head out of your pocket. Turn around.
Hey, Mr. Shirley.
Get your hands in your pocket. Do you have a key there?
Good, 1046.
Do you have
40
keys
West
in there?
Casella City. Indian Florida, black
Okay, you got
key.
sheriff, I checked real quick. Okay, arms up. I'm gonna take you! I'm gonna take you! Get down on the fucking ground! On the fucking ground now! Stop! Stop it! Stop! 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 Step down, Charlie. Go ahead down. Shots fired. Suspect down. Get your arms out.
Location.
I'm at Tulare Ridge, the first lot, start 47. He took my taser, tried to tase me.
Charlie, I copy. Clear the channel. Star 47 can't take. 1 Charlie is cleared at 1738.
Did y'all see any of this, ma'am? Man, he took my taser and tased me, okay?
70 to 79. Are you Coach J?
Yeah, I'm Cody. I'm here with the suspect.
Okay. Ma'am, could you please step back? You didn't see anything? Did you see any of this? Did y'all witness any of this? Okay, will you step back in the chair, please? Did y'all witness any of this, ma'am? You did witness it? Okay. Stick around for me, okay?
1715 Merchant.
1710 Merchant, 1710 Merchant Drive.
Can you give me a call?
Please, if you saw this, don't leave, okay? Thank you.
Okay, now that you've seen the video, you've watched it from this perspective. He walks up, talks to witnesses located here, goes around the building, the fight comes back down through here, which is seen on camera, then they leave the camera, and they come over to this area, which is really the area in question where I think the bulk of the incident that we need to talk about today took place. In determining whether or not this was in fact a justifiable shooting, we needed to look at different things, and the bulk of what we looked at was eyewitness accounts and forensic proof. When the shooting first occurred, the Sheriff's Department canvassed the area, talked to everyone there. Throughout that canvass, they ended up determining that there were in fact 5 people who actually witnessed this event. Those 5 people were located here. There were 3 people here in this apartment and out on this porch, as you saw on the video. There were 2 people next door in this particular apartment. They were inside, but they were looking out through a window. So there at the scene, we were able to go back and talk to 5 witnesses. The Sheriff's Department interviewed 5 eyewitnesses that told us what had happened. This event, as you can tell by listening to the audio and watching the cruiser video, was very traumatic. It happened very quickly. There are 5 witnesses who saw it. Their statements are somewhat contradictory. Some of them contradict themselves within their own statements. We have included those statements in your packet. You have them in an addendum at the end of your memo. The totality of what these witnesses said, even though small details differed, was that Mr. Feep continued to pursue the officer. And the other thing one of the witnesses said was just spontaneously on her own, it just wasn't that officer's fault. So even though the witnesses all saw different types of things, you can take their statements and look in them in great detail. The overall perspective of what they say happened matches with both the forensic proof and with Officer Williams' statement. In order to determine whether or not this is a justifiable shoot, I have to review it both subjectively and objectively to be able to determine whether or not Officer Williams was in imminent fear for his life. That's the standard. In order to determine subjectively what he was thinking, the best evidence for that is his statement telling us what was going through his mind at the time that he fired on Mr. Feep. So I just want to tell you a little bit about what he said in his statement. He said that as Mr. Feep and he began to fight coming down this hill, that if you remember from the video, there was a point when Mr. Feep was clearly on top of Officer Williams here. He says at that point Mr. Feep used either his arm or his hand to place it on Officer Williams' throat and was choking him here. He said that's the first time he thought that he was beginning to fear for his life. They continued down on into the parking lot. In the parking lot, down here, he pulls his taser, as you heard him say, I'm going to tase you, I'm going to tase you, and followed Mr. Feet. Mr. Williams' statement and the witness's statement all confirm that they came back to this area, that Mr. Feet stopped, that Officer Williams had the taser pulled on him, and as Officer Williams was pointing the taser at Mr. Feet lunged forward and grabbed the end of the taser. They began to fight over the taser, according to Officer Williams. In this area, as they were fighting over the taser, he began to try to move over to his rear passenger door to let his dog out. He's a canine officer, so he had Nash, his dog, in this car. So as they're fighting, he moves towards the car. He, in his statement, says that he believes that's the time during the tussle that when he divided his attention trying to get to the door handle, that Mr. Feet was able to actually take the taser away from him. And he says at this point that Mr. Feet took the taser, pointed it at him, and fired. Several of the witness statements corroborate that. So does physical proof, which I will show you in a moment. But at the time that the taser is fired at Officer Williams, to get subjectively into his mind, to know what his statement says about his thoughts were, he said, I thought he was going to kill me. I thought he's going to shoot this at me. He's going to incapacitate me, and he's going to be able to take my gun and shoot me. I had time to think. I'm going to die, and thinking about my wife and kid that I'm never going to see again. So that is what was going through my mind. I think this is it. I have to end this threat as soon as I can, because one split second and he could either be on top of me and overpower me, or he could pull that trigger again and pull the taser again, and it only takes that much. So his statement is that he was being tased at the time, therefore he was in fear for his life, and that is when he returned fire. The 5 witness statements in totality corroborate that. One thing that I want to address also is, we've talked about the eyewitness statements, and you have copies of those. There were 3 other statements given in this case that I want to address, and those are statements that have been released to the media. There were 3 individuals who gave statements to the media that we have reached out to. One is Denzel Grant. He gave a statement to the media saying that when the young man tried to run away from the law enforcement officer, that's when the shots were fired. We have talked with Mr. Grant. He has told us and confirmed he was not there when the shooting occurred. He came to the scene afterwards, was merely repeating things he'd heard. Another eyewitness that concerned us was to Kenya Hyatt. We wanted to make sure that we reached out to every single person that would have known anything about this. When we tried to talk to her, she refused to talk to us. But she did tell the media at some point that she saw 2 bullet holes in the back of Mr. Feet. The forensic proof does not bear that out, and we have Dr. Jarinka Malusnik-Polchin here to go over that forensic proof with you in just a moment. The third person that released information to the media that has been reported was Mr. Billy Johns Jr. He made a statement saying that he witnessed this event and that Mr. Feet didn't look scared. He didn't look as if he was running from something. He heard 3 pops, did not know where the shots were coming from, and that 15 to 20 seconds passed before he saw an officer move towards the body. We know that is not accurate. And how do we know that? You've listened to the video. You heard the shots. We know that there are 16 seconds between the shots being fired and Officer Williams calling this in. During that 16-second period, Officer Williams gives 7 commands in a loud voice to Mr. Feet, the first being drop it, followed by stop, 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 stop 6 times. So we know that the portion of Mr. John's statement where he said that nobody came around, there was no officer for 15 to 20 seconds is not accurate. He also filmed from a vantage point here on the 2nd floor, and from that vantage point, there is a tree that precludes your view. He also made statements to the press that there was no, he saw no police vehicle, and that Mr. Feep's gold sedan was not there. We know that's not true from the video. So many of the things in Mr. John's statement are not, we're not able to corroborate those. As a matter of fact, the proof would show that much of his statement is not true. We've tried to find him. We have been unable to get him to speak with us or to find him at this point, but we wanted to make sure that we did talk to him. Those are the witness statements. What we really, really rely on is the forensic proof. And we make sure that the forensic proof corroborate the witness statements. And in this particular case, I want to show you a little bit of that. These are photographs of Officer Williams just after the fight when the Sheriff's Department arrived on the scene. You'll see obviously that the front of of Officer Williams is covered in mud from the fight that you witnessed coming down the hill. What I want you to notice is that there is a taser wire. You'll notice that the taser wire is on Officer Williams. During the fight, his mic becomes dislodged and is swinging during the fight. So the taser wire was picked back up when he put his mic back up on his shoulder. So that's how it got through there, I believe. But the taser wire is still on Officer Williams when the sheriff's office arrives. This is the back. Shows once again the mud on him from the fight. This is a close-up. This shows you the actual prong from the taser, how it had gone onto him and become lodged just behind an item on his duty belt. This is a picture of the prong off of the taser that was removed from Officer Williams. You saw the fight coming down the hill. The hill was extremely, I show you this to show you that the hill was muddy, it was wet. This is where the actual fight scene took place. Those are evidence markers that you see with letters. They detail things that are located at the scene. You'll notice that Officer Williams' badge was torn from his uniform. It was laying there on the hill. What I really want to focus on is this area down here where we know things happened. There are three significant markers. You'll see O, P, and Q. We know from the forensic proof that between these markers, O, P, and Q, is where the actual shooting took place. I want to tell you what these things are. O is the taser trigger mechanism. This is what the taser that Officer Williams was carrying. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a taser and how it works. This is a taser just like the KPD is issued. The taser is kept off. When a taser is switched on and put in to a mode where it is active, it downloads. We have the downloads from this particular taser in this particular case. We know that this taser was on for a total of 20 seconds. It was on for 15 seconds, and then it was actually fired for the last 5 seconds of that 20 seconds. When a taser is fired, this front part, the cartridge, opens. These green things are doors, blast doors on the front. This cartridge does come off of the taser trigger mechanism. When it is fired, the doors come off. The doors go out at an angle. They go out first. The probes come out second. They come out and on top of each other, they carry the electric current. These little discs that come out are like confetti. They come out and go on the ground to let us know the location of where a taser was fired. Once these probes go out, they come into contact. An electromagnetic current goes back and forth between those probes. The amount of current depends on where the probes are, how far apart they are. You can be tased just by being between them without being having contact with them. So those little confetti things are called aphids. They're felon identification discs, or aphids is what we refer to them as. So that's what we're talking about here. This is the trigger mechanism of the taser. We know when the taser fires, the doors, the blast doors come off and spread. So we know that P and Q are the blast doors. You'll see that P is one of the green blast doors. You'll also see that Q is one of the blast doors. When they come off, they go out at an angle. Therefore, we know that here at O is where the taser was when it was fired, because we know that the blast doors went out in this direction. We also know that Officer Williams, while he was being tased, would have to be located between P and Q. And we know that Mr. Feet had to have the taser in his hand to be able to deploy the electricity, so we know that he was located here. So we know this is where Mr. Feet and Officer Williams were located when the shots were fired. We based that upon the taser, the blast doors. I also want to show you a couple of those little aphids by Q. They're very tiny and hard to see. Here is a pink aphid. As we blow that up, you can see where that is. Here is Q again. Once again, Q is here. This particular police car was not there during the time. This is a county car or a city car that's come up after the actual shooting. But there is Q once again with more aphids around it. So we know that the taser was fired here. We know that Officer Williams was hit with the taser in here, and Mr. Feet dropped the taser in this location. More forensic proof shows us that Officer Williams was here between P and Q, because we know that the S, which is what you're looking at here, is a casing, a gun casing. In this video, you heard Officer Williams fire 2 quick, short rounds. When an officer fires, the rounds eject to the right. So we know that this casing ejected to the right. So we know at the time that he fired, he had to be pointed in this direction towards O. The casing coming out to the right, landing here just beside this fence. So more forensic proof that Officer Williams was here in the tase zone and firing at the person who had the taser. It's also worth noting that that Mr. Feet had no tase marks on him, too. This is just a closer up of where we found the shell casing and what the shell casing looked like. After Mr. Feet was shot, he ran in this direction. He ran around this dumpster, and he ended up on this side of the dumpster. Here is a picture of that where he ran. These markers, once again, are evidence markers A through E. Those are all blood splatterings as he was running. That blood has been tested by the TBI, and that blood did come back to Mr. Feet, so we know that it is his blood. This is F. It's located just here at the corner of the dumpster. And what F is the cartridge off of the front of that taser. It's located here. In a closer photo, you can see that that's what it is, and it's hung just here. The taser wires, as you can see in this photo coming out, were attached on the other end to Officer Williams, as you saw. So what has happened is, as Mr. Feet has run, Officer Williams, more forensic proof that he followed this way. He had the taser wires on him. The cartridge had become disengaged from the taser, and as he rounded this corner, chasing Mr. Feet. We believe that dragging the cartridge caught on the corner and the wires broke, and that's why the cartridge is located there. Just to show you a completion of the trip around, this is where Mr. Feet ended up, and those are evidence markers around him, G, H, and I. This is evidence marker I, located just beside Mr. Feet. You see it on the screen. It has a cigarette pack, and it has foil, rolled up foil. That foil had a brown residue in it. We sent that off to have that tested. Some of the eyewitnesses told us that Mr. Feet was throwing things from his pocket just before he went down. So there were several things laying around him. This we sent to the TBI lab to have that substance in that tin foil tested, and that substance came back. Here's a report showing that the substance was cocaine, which may explain some of why perhaps Mr. Feet was running from the police. We also had the cartridge, the taser cartridge. It was hung up here, F, tested by the TBI, as well as the taser for any DNA. What we found was on the taser firing mechanism, there was a mixture of 2 DNAs, not enough to identify anyone, but one of the DNAs was male. And we also found that on F, the taser cartridge itself, the front part, it was only Mr. Feet's DNA. So there was his DNA on the front of the cartridge, which is more forensic proof supporting the theory that he grabbed the front of the taser as he took it away from Officer Williams. The witness statements, the forensic evidence that I've gone over are 2 of the main things that we looked at. The third piece was the trajectory of the bullet, and that was what came from the Regional Forensic Center. Dr. Malusnik is now going to tell us about the autopsy and bullet trajectory, so we can talk about that piece.
Thank you very much. The medical examiner conducts independent investigation, but in conjunction with the law enforcement, and our medical legal death investigator responded to the scene within an hour of being notified on that day. The scene belongs to the law enforcement, and the decedent actually becomes our custody from the moment of pronouncement. The medical legal death investigator, Amanda Erickson, responded to the scene and made the pronouncement. She also made created a number of photographs, and all of those photographs in the scene investigation are reviewed internally. And then those photographs, in addition to the photographs that become our evidence that are created at the time of the autopsy, are then given to the Attorney General to further conduct their investigation. So our role always is to protect the decedent, and then determine the cause and manner of death, which was gunshot wound to the back as the cause of death, and the manner of death was a homicide. Dr. Christopher Lockmuller, board certified forensic pathologist and chief deputy medical examiner, my deputy chief, actually conducted the autopsy, and all in custody deaths are reviewed internally. So I'm very familiar with the case from the essentially moment where it was related to us, and through the entire autopsy, and then through the review of the case. So on this mannequin, I can just demonstrate the trajectory. The deaths that are suspected homicide are always imaged. The X-ray images are done, and also that image is provided and can be later shared by the Attorney General. So between the photographs that show the trajectory, autopsy report that is compiled, and then the X-ray images, actually they all confirm the same story as far as the trajectory of the bullet. So we called it gunshot wound of the back, and the reason why we called it as such is that usually main anatomic regions where the missile or bullet enters the body is listed as the cause of that. And in this particular situation is that it wasn't in the head and neck region, It wasn't on the front. The front essentially is anything that is kind of chest or abdomen to the axillary line, and then anything that is between the what we call posterior axillary line, we call it back. So in this situation, and also the clothing items are reviewed too, and the reason for that is that we also try to determine the range of fire. That's one of the main aims of the autopsy. And on the clothing item, although there was a lot of blood staining, and of course the clothes were wet from the rain, we were not able to ascertain any gunpowder or soot presence. The other thing is also important is that if it's contact or is it very close range within, depending on the weapon, a couple of feet, some of the gunpowder might penetrate through the relatively thin t-shirt, so we did not see any of that penetration on the skin. So the skin did not show evidence of contact or close range firing, which then basically is then called indeterminate range. So in this particular situation, the entrance was what we call on the back. It was right at the axilla, bottom of the axilla, and it was approximately 1 inch toward right. So it actually enters in this region about 1 inch, and then the bullet trajectory breaks the, what we call the kind of back or posterolateral fourth rib. We need some assistance to kind of stabilize the mannequin, if you don't mind. So it enters in this region. The main actually orientation is from left to right. So that's really the main orientation of the bullet. It goes slightly from back to front and slightly down. The drop, you have it, so I can just, might not work. But this is essentially the main trajectory, and I might look just like this. So essentially left to right, slightly back to front, and about 3.5 inch drop, slightly downward. And then for location of the missile, which cannot be clearly visible when the photographs are taken, but it's noticeable. Actually, I can rest it right here. It's noticeable as a slight bruise. It's essentially right here, the lateral or the side of the breast, and the X-rays clearly show where the missile is lodged. There was a single gunshot wound, entered essentially right next to the scapula, behind the axillary line for about 1 inch. It involves the left chest, it involves the upper lobe of the left lung. It perforates the aorta, descending aorta. It crosses the middle of the body, midline. It goes into the right chest cavity, involves the right bronchus and upper lobe of the right lung, and then penetrates or goes between the muscles that are in the so-called third intercostal space. Because the ribs have a slight kind of slant, that's why we have like a fourth and third here, but the third is actually lower position because of the orientation of the ribs. Specifically when one exhales, then the ribs are going to have that downward position. The bullet that is recovered is a deformed, large caliber copper jacketed bullet that was sent for the ballistic testing. And there was one fragment, lead fragment, that was recovered from the right chest cavity. There was a lot of blood in the left chest cavity. There was a lot of blood in the right chest cavity. Essentially, exsanguination due to the bullet wounds was the main mechanism of that. And the, again, trajectory is mainly left to right, slightly back to front, and slightly downward. The missile is then sealed by the forensic pathologist and sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for ballistic testing.
Was there toxicology? Could you talk about
Absolutely, yes. Every case, especially homicide, suspected homicide, is going to have toxicology performed. We collected the blood specimen from the femoral vessels, which is the best specimen to demonstrate what is in the system at the time of death. And that was also sent to Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, just like all the other evidence that is photographed, sealed, and then sent as evidence to them for testing. And those results did come back, and I believe we have results to share with you.
I'll just hit this. You can make sure it's in the right place. Before I hit the arrow. There you go.
So what is presented here, 3 different specimens are sent. Blood sample from the femoral vessels, urine sample, and vitreous sample. Vitreous sample is the fluid from the eyes that is frequently used just for confirmation of certain results, especially alcohol. And 001 specimen is blood, and you can see here that is positive for cocaine. The second and third substance here, anhydroagonine methyl ester and agonine methyl ester are actually metabolites or breakdown products of cocaine. And then we have levamisole, which is actually a very interesting compound because that's the most frequent adulterant or agent that the cocaine is cut with to, I guess, increase the volume and increase the value for the distributor. And so what positive result means is that it was just under the cutoff value to do proper quantification, meaning that it was already metabolizing, but it was in the blood certainly as a parent substance and as 2 metabolites. And the cutting agent, levamisole, essentially just confirms, where it came from and that it's truly cocaine purchased from the street.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. Okay, and here is just highlighting that particular area. Okay. So in this case, at the end of the day, what we had to look at was whether or not at the time Officer Williams shot Mr. Feep, whether he acted under a reasonable belief that he was facing an imminent threat of death or bodily injury. Based upon all the witness statements, the forensic proof, and certainly the taser, we believe that at the time he did believe that his life was in danger and that Mr. Feep was in fact going to kill him. Therefore, after review of all those facts, we've determined that it was in fact a justifiable shooting. One thing that played heavily in our determination was the trajectory of the bullet. It was the early information that I heard, really through the press before I even heard it from the sheriff's office, was that Mr. Feep had been shot in the back, which is very concerning. If Mr. Feep had in fact been running from Officer Williams, as some of the early accounts came out, and was a distance away and was shot in the back, that would clearly not be a justifiable homicide. But this is not a shooting where he was running and he was shot in the back and the bullet came out the front. This is a shooting where the bullet travels from the left to the right inside the body, which to me indicates that Mr. Feep did much the same as Officer Williams. Officer Williams says when the taser was pointed at him, he turned to his right and ducked. That's why the taser wires are to his left. I believe that when the gun came up and was pointed at Mr. Feep, he did much the same thing and turned to shield himself. And in turning to shield himself, that is how he has the bullet traveling from left to right across his body, not in fact from back to front as if he were running from the officer. So based upon a totality of everything that we've looked at, I do believe this was a justifiable shoot, both subjectively and objectively. I do believe that there is reason to clear Officer Williams in this case, and we'll be doing so today. So at this point, we will prepare those packets. We will get them out to you, and we will be answering any questions that you have.
Will we be able to get those packets in electronic form as well?
You have them.
Perfect. That was great.
We have them on discs. We have discs for you. So the disc contains everything you saw, which obviously are the audios, videos, and also a detailed memorandum. So if you don't have any questions, thank you.
Actually, just one quick one. Obviously, we've gone over all of this evidence, and you talked about transparency. I think for folks that have been following this case, could you just, one more time, the opportunity of from the DA's office, from you, what do you want people to know today when they review this themselves and they hear that this is how you've ruled, basically?
I want people to know that we are an independent agency that reviews law enforcement's work, that we look at that work. We do a very thorough look at that work. We're very thankful to have the ME's office to partner with us in that. And I think I want people to understand that we don't rush to judgment. There's been some criticism of how long this has taken. Quite frankly, it's been rather quick. But I just want people to know that we do look at everything. We tried to find every single witness that we could possibly find, send every piece of evidence off to the lab. Some of these lab reports we just got back last week. We got back the TBI lab reports on the taser last week. So that was the last piece we were waiting on, but I just want people to know that we're thorough. We consider everything, and we are more than willing to share that information as soon as we are legally able to do that. And we're always open to answer any questions. In a case like this, I realize there's a loss of life, and I never, ever want to shortcut that. So I want to give every case, especially these cases, every bit of effort that we possibly can to make sure we come to a just conclusion. And I feel like we did. I really feel like we did, and want people to understand why and how.
Officer Williams has been on administrative leave this whole time, and he will be back to work tomorrow?
That I don't know. You'll have to direct that question to the chief.
Last one. You said that this was fast. Is there kind of a general average timeline that a case like this, or cases that come to your office, usually would take to get all of this testing done?
It really varies greatly, and it is because of testing. Toxicology takes a long time getting things back from the TBI lab. In this particular case, we had trouble trying to find witnesses because we wanted to be thorough, and if we were missing something, we wanted to make sure, especially in those folks that released that information to the press, we wanted to make sure that we heard them and made sure that we eliminated that possibility, because had their statements been true, we would be in a very different position right now. So we wanted to make sure that we gave every effort to find them. And as I said, we were never able to find the one witness in Atlanta, but we've made an effort. And so that depends on timing, depends on all those things.
Would that have been easier if the officer had been wearing a body camera?
Well, it's hard to tell. What we want is the most and the best evidence we can possibly get. Yes, body cams present good evidence. However, in this case, we had a cruiser video, which in this particular case might have given us better evidence than a body cam, because as you remember seeing, Officer Williams' mic was ripped from his body and it was swinging and hanging during the fight. So in this particular case, if he'd had on a body cam, I wonder really what we would have gotten from the body cam, because it would have become dislodged, probably covered in mud. But certainly we like any evidence we can get, the more the better. So we are in favor of body cams, dash cams, all the evidence we can possibly obtain to make a fair and just determination.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.